Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have a book review of the massive book, Destiny, by Elizabeth Haydon. It is the third book in the Symphony of Ages series, or this trilogy. It's the final book in the Rhapsody Trilogy, as it's also called. There are 3 books in this trilogy. The series is 3 trilogies. It's 9 books total. But you have the first book is Rhapsody, the second book is Prophecy, and then the third book is Destiny. And as you can see, each book gets successively longer. The first one's about 600 pages, second one's about 700 pages, third one's about 800 pages. So they can successively get longer. Brief thoughts on the previous books before I get into Destiny. I picked up the whole trilogy at a used bookstore because I saw the cover, and the cover really intrigued me. I love that 90s, maybe late 80s feel of covers where it feels like a big painting, it feels sweeping, it feels like the epic fantasy stories that when you think of the genre, you think epic fantasy. And so when I saw these covers, I was like, I've got to get these covers, these books. Particularly, I thought Book 3's cover was outstanding, and Book 1's cover is a little muted, but I still like it. Book 2's cover is pretty good too. But I picked up Book 1, and I loved it. I loved it. Now, I will caveat that by saying I don't think anyone else is going to love it as much as me, because there are certain things in here that are very controversial. The way she deals with romance and sex and all that stuff, I think is very controversial, but I quite enjoyed it. But I think most people won't, so I have that caveat there. But I loved it. And then I was like so excited, let's go into Book 2. And I picked up Book 2 and read Book 2, and it was fine. I enjoyed bits of it, but I had major problems with it. So it was like a kind of a meh overall view. Like there were some elements that were amazing, some that were terrible, some that were meh. So it's in meh overall. So I had kicked the can down the road on the third book for a couple reasons. One, because the second book didn't leave me too excited, and also because the third book is enormous, and I was, I had other books I wanted to read at the time, other tomes I wanted to get into. And then eventually I just decided, you know what, I'm going to read the third book, darn it, and we'll just see what happens. And I actually purchased the next 3 books in paperback, and because I like the covers so much and I like the series, and I was like, you know what, we'll read this and then I'll determine whether or not I'll keep reading the series after this, because this will tie up the initial trilogy. Well, I read this book and I loved it. This is an amazing book, on par with the first book. I think the first book's just a smidge better. It's such a smidge better book, but this one is phenomenal. First of all, if you like the whole Wheel of Time world building and political stuff, you will love this book. This is, the first book had elements of the Wheel of Time, it had elements of Lord of the Rings, and had elements of those kind of YA fantasies. And they just kind of blended together really well. And then there was political talk, there was talk about trade routes, there was talk about mythology and religion, all that stuff. Book 2 got heavy into the romance. There were some fantasy elements in there with the dragon, but it got heavy into the romance for several hundred pages, and it really tuned me out of the story. But the third book reblends everything together perfectly, but really focuses on the kind of Wheel of Time level world building and political structure and magic system and whatnot. And I thought it was brilliant. The main plot of the book is hunting down the Fedor, who are the main villains of the trilogy. But that plot does not take up as much of the book as you would expect. It is the major plot of this book and is the overarching plot getting to here, like they've been building to this. But that's not the main. That's not the whole book. That only takes place a portion of the book. The last portion of the book is actually focused on the political world building. All right, what do we do now? How do we rebuild? If you've been following the trilogy, they are the people from the island of Serendar they're this kind of magical people. They're kind of like the elves in Lord of the Rings, but they left their homeland and went to the land of the other humans, and they're kind of intermingled now. And it's like, we don't have a king. Nobody really has a true king. And it's like, well, what do we do? Do we unite? Do we stay divided? What do we do? And so they have a big council, which lasts for several hundred pages. And they have to figure out who's going to be our leaders and what are we going to do politically and, with marriage relations and all that stuff. And if that doesn't sound appealing to you, you may want to turn this off. But I'm telling you, if you enjoy The Wheel of Time for its type of world building and political discussions and magic system and stuff, you'll enjoy this because it really, I don't think I've ever read a book where I said, man, this feels like Wheel of Time. Like Stormlight Archive, everyone says is the natural successor to The Wheel of Time. And when it comes to scope and characters and being an epic fantasy series in terms of sales, yeah, I would say Stormlight Archive. But in terms of feeling, in terms of nailing the Wheel of Time feeling, like you could throw this in and I think someone would think it's a little bit like a Wheel of Time book. The difference is the romance elements in here are vastly different from the romance elements of a Wheel of Time book, but the romance isn't as much in this book as it was in Wheel of Time, so it's still well worth it. This book has a fairly big cast. You still have Rhapsody, you still have Ash, you still have you have Ahmed, you have Grunthor, and Grunthor gets some great moments here. He was mostly sidelined in book 2 that I didn't like, and he's not in this a ton, but he's pretty good. You also have Lauron, who I think is fantastic. I love reading about Lauron. Just an awesome name and awesome character. And then Elendra, which I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but Elendra gets a lot of attention in this book. And I thought she was a really good character. I think I had vaguely remembered her from the previous books, but she is like a major player here. This is the perfect payoff. Like, you don't have to commit to the whole 9 books. Just commit to the trilogy and note that the first book's amazing. The second, though it has moments in it that are a slog, and then the second book is a slog, and then the third book is amazing. But this trilogy, this pays everything off that the first 2 books promised, and that's a very difficult thing to do. But it pays off everything that was promised, and it really makes you feel like you are rewarded for sticking around. And that's something that most series don't nail. Again, Wheel of Time nailed that perfectly, but this series does as well. So I really loved this book. I can't gush about it enough. There's so many spoiler things I wish I could talk about. By the way, the epilogue, I started reading the epilogue and I said, I think I know who this character is. And I was right. And I was so happy that I was right. I loved that epilogue. But I thought it was really sweet. It's a great story, great payoffs, all that stuff. So if you've read this book, you read the trilogy, let me know your thoughts. What did you think of the romantic payoff? What did you think of the political payoff? All that stuff. And what did you think of that epilogue, which I thought was fantastic? I give this like a 9.8 out of 10. Like, solidly loved this book. Could have trimmed it a little bit, but still, I loved it. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.